And I'm going to invite somebody very special to the stage, Marilyn Matz. Marilyn, please come join me. So Marilyn was a founder of Cognex, which some of you may know as one of the earlier players in machine vision. And then she's also subsequently become part of Teradyne. She's on the board there too. And then has stayed true to her roots in AI and big data and is part of and leading the team actually at Paradigm4. So for those of you who don't know, very involved in the scientific part of data and machine learning. So Marilyn, welcome. Good to have you here. And then really, Marilyn and I are actually just the side dish. The entree here is Doug Merritt. Doug, please come join us. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So,
thank you for having me.
I won't embarrass you too much, but I will just say that I've known Doug for about 20 years, and both of us had a little more hair and a little trimmer physique in those days.
Less wrinkles.
But why I got to know Doug is very exciting. He was actually one of the very first people to start a cloud company. For those of you who didn't know it, Icarian, which was one of the workforce management players that got onto the cloud before anybody was even calling it that, actually.
Yeah. So
it's been a pleasure to get to know Doug. And for the last 5 years, he's been CEO of Splunk, which I think many of you do know, which he's built to now an $18 billion business in market cap terms and $2 billion in revenue. So I think you've done that with some aplomb, to say the least, and we're going to now tear it apart and figure out whether you actually knew what you were doing. Settle down and enjoy yourself.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm very jealous of the shoes, the underscore V shoes.
I know.
That's so smart.
Well,
we just have T-shirts. I love the shoes.
Well, I'm glad you like them. The last person who said that was Andy Jassy, who was in your spot this time last year. And we actually sent him some. So, Devin, I hope you noted that. Okay, looks like you've got a
size 11.
That's all we need to know. Excellent. Well, great to have you both here. So Marilyn and I will take it in turns to play a bit of ping-pong questioning here.
Okay.
I'd love to get started by talking a little bit about what you've brought to Splunk, which is this mission to make sure that data is accessible to everybody, is valuable to everybody, and is usable by everybody. And so I'm really curious to know, where did that sort of vision and mission come from, and you know, what's behind that, and how is that driving Splunk today?
So I was lucky enough to inherit that vision. It was part of the founding tenets and idea set that Eric Swan and Rob Doss, the two key technical coders that drove the product, had in mind. And they did something that for any of us that have played in the data world for big chunks of our career, that surprisingly, 15 years later, is still not replicated, or no one has found a way to replicate it yet. And I think part of what they did that's so unique is they inverted the entire thinking on data. How many people have coded and worked with relational databases, data warehouses, data marts, like the whole thing that we get when we're educated and trained and pounded into our head is be very thoughtful about the data. Normalize the data, map out the relationships between data, garbage in, garbage out. There's so much education that is important around the structured data sources. But what Splunk did that people have almost lost sight of is for one use case, which is really the primary use case for the underlying index as it started, which is you want to investigate a problem. And you have no, investigation by nature means you have no idea what questions you're going to ask. If you want to have a question-asking data store, then you can't schematize the data by nature. Because as soon as you enrich, filter, stripe the data, you lose the flexibility of what you want to do with that data, because you've cast it in a certain format. And even more importantly, you start with logs, which I view as a completely non-manageable, chaotic, emergent data source.
Right.
And the fact that some people talk about this category that we're in as a log management category cracks me up, because the English language creates a null set between those two. You cannot manage logs. So if you have an unmanageable data source and you've got a problem, which is how do you attack this data with a fresh question every single time, then you're really making machine data valuable and easy and insightful for everybody. And since then, we've gone in a bunch of different directions. But I think that genesis of being a curiosity-satisfying, a question-asking machine is at the heart of what's made Splunk a unique footprint within the industry.
And Marilyn's been following you from way back.
Since 2003, before Doug joined the
well
company.
Well before I joined the company. I wish I had joined in 2000 and stayed.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was impressive from the beginning, and you've done even more since then. So it's a cool company to keep your eye on.
Well, thank you.
Marilyn, I know you wanted to start with a question a little bit along the lines of what's transformed in that period of time.
Yeah, so part of what I was thinking about also is you've talked to us about transformation, and I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit more about the multiple transformations that you've taken the company through.
Sure. My job interview with the board of directors to be the CEO was really just about transformation. That was how I painted it. And we focused on a couple different aspects that I thought were going to be important over the next, what's now 5 years, but at that time, over the coming years for Splunk. And the first was we were going to have to go through a business model transformation. This amazing, beautiful product that at that point in time had scaled to probably 9,000 or 10,000 different customers and was $600 million in revenue. It was born on-prem, and it was sold in a perpetual model with a maintenance contract. Very 1990s. Yeah. As Michael said, I very stupidly founded a workforce management company in the cloud in 1996. So even way back then, we were beginning to think about what does a services offering look like versus giving away bits and having the other side own it. So the first was a business model transformation. We had to move from a perpetual license with maintenance stream company to a renewable license company. And I'd call that ratable, but with this fun new accounting standard that passed a couple years ago, when you write a term contract for bits that you give to someone to run in their own data center, it has different accounting treatment. So we had to move from a perpetual license company to a term and a cloud company. As part of that transition, we believed that we had to re-architect the vast majority of the product. It was built for a classic vertical scale-out environment, more of a unified infrastructure compute storage architecture that was super important and popular 2005 to 2015, but not for this next generation horizontal, ephemeral, more stateless cloud world. And as we did those two, we also were very focused on more of an individual user and a manager level footprint. And where we could see this going was more of a enterprise-wide data fabric and data backbone. So we're gonna have to transform our entire marketing and sales footprints so that we could go from a IT operations and data center cell to eventually, don't lose that, keep that, but go to a C-suite sale and start to become more effective at enterprise-wide million and multi-million-dollar deals, all while trying not to lose the culture of the company and try not to miss a quarter because we're a public company at that point in time, and missing quarters never turns out to be very pleasant for the customers or the management team when that occurs.
It's very typical of you, Doug, if I have to say so. It's like never take on one problem when you can take on three as a public company under the spotlight. Anyway, it's great. You mentioned their culture, which is actually a critical part of what it always takes to scale a business. Tell us a little bit about how did you maintain the culture, and indeed, how do you keep the sort of innovative entrepreneurship wheel going with all this going on?
So culture is it's so fascinating because like everything in life, I think change is a constant. And cultures have to change. There's this whole rhetoric of and belief set of how do we hold on to what we have, and I just don't believe in anything but growth. I think everything else is kind of a figment of our imagination. Time as we know it moves forward. We're moving forward with time, and so holding on to the present or going back into the past, which some leaders seem obsessed with these days, is a recipe for disaster. So how do you Yep. continue to pay attention to the things that you like and find ways to try and keep them alive as you're morphing the organization, I think is a challenge all of us have because I've been in many of your shoes as a startup basis, and what it feels like in 3-5 people versus 40 people versus 150 people winds up being radically different as well, just through the dynamics of adding different people with different perspectives and backgrounds. So from the time I joined, we were roughly 900 to 1,000 people, and we're 5,500 people now, so massive change in the organization. I know the culture has changed. But the pieces that I think are important that we're trying to keep alive in different incarnations is a humility factor to the business. I've described it, it was described before me, and I've described it as a blue-collar culture. And what I mean by that is people should be willing to roll up their sleeves, get work done, and be proud of doing work. Less chiefs and more doers, more people that actually are involved down to the code level or down to an individual account level or a support ticket level. So keep that blue-collar ethic, keep the humility, and I think something that we've always been pretty good at is we're super resilient. We pivot very well. We're scrappy. The founders didn't come from the marquee schools. They were much more systems administration-ish type people. And that ethos within the company of you can come from anywhere, at any age, of any background, and as long as you love learning, are willing to be open to change and progress and development, and love challenge and are a curious individual, then you can be super successful at Splunk. And those are the pieces that we've tried through a multitude of forums. We have most of the things that are cool that happen at Splunk happen without anyone knowing, anyone's permission. We call it duocracy. People just jump in and see something that's interesting and less formal than Google with the 1 day a week to go experiment, but still that same orientation of if you see something that's fascinating, just go get it done. We really try and screen for people that have dealt with change very successfully. A lot of the interview questions, and for some reason we still do 15 to 20 interviews before most people get hired, which turns out to be a good framework to help both sides evaluate whether they're really excited. But a lot of the questions come back to, tell me about a challenge where you have failed recently, and what did you learn from that failure? And tell me about the thing that was the most painful thing in your life, and how did you move forward from that item? But the same thing with a lot of the performance review systems and promotions. We really are trying to find people with grit and tenacity and resilience. And then we screw up all the time too and don't always get it right. But
I think that's part of the key, actually, is when you do that, is to celebrate it and find ways to actually learn from it and grow from it.
Yeah.
So congrats for doing that.
Yeah.
Marilyn, I know you remarked when we were sort of preparing and spending some time thinking about what we would talk to Doug about, that he'd also thought about the whole ecosystem and how shared prosperity can come from this data delivery. So you want to chat about that?
Yeah. You've talked before about how data is the key to driving shared prosperity. And I thought maybe you could give us some real examples of how Splunk is helping some of your customers with customer service or security or better operations. Then how are you extracting value out of this data, especially when, many of these organizations, it's siloed across the company. How are you pulling together these diverse data to make change and create value?
So I'll go 30,000 just for a second and then drop down to, because it's a really good question. There are great literal examples. But the rhetoric in the industry of we've got to get rid of data silos, and data silos are a problem. And how do you manage data silos? That's existed for my entire life. Yeah. And I view it as that, again, it's an odd statement. Silos are increasing, and they're only going to increase at an increasing rate. There are more data tools, more data structures today than there were a year ago, and many more then than there were 10 years ago. And when I jumped in my first vendor job was with Oracle right after I'd gone public in 1989, so it was like a $600 million company. There were 5 or 6 relational vendors that were operating against that published paper and the precursor to, I guess, as strong of an open source movement. And now you look today and there are you look at the 451 placemat of data. And there's 1,500 or 2,500 different, for a good reason. They're all architected to serve different use cases. Yeah. And small differences in design thinking and design architecture result in some pretty dramatic capabilities that is hard to get lowest common denominator and get that kind of throughput and traction. So in a world of sprawling data, what Splunk does within our storage vehicle is this non-schematized, ever-changing kind of organic investigative swamp. That's kind of the core of Splunk, is you put non-filtered, non-curated data into this investigative swamp and ask a bunch of questions. And through that, you wind up being able to serve any constituency that wants to ask a question within the organization. To get repetitive use, you need a structure. You need structure from that data, which goes back to more and more data silos. Because when you want to ask a question a million times, you should cast it in the form of a metric or an event or a multidimensional model or something that's going to have a lot more structure to it. On the shared prosperity piece, when we look at the challenges that humanity is facing today, almost all the fundamental root cause analysis and then eventual fix for these problems and or the opportunity to lean forward without a problem but to create something new has data at its basis. You're trying to understand the current landscape and figure out where the future may go or where it might hold. And that underlying interesting flexibility of Splunk that I like from a design architecture basis is it allows you to play with chaos and find the patterns. And when you find the pattern, then you understand that's something I want to cast and replicate in a more structured format. So it's a high fidelity, bottoms up way to eventually get to a whole series of structures that will live for a longer period of time and be used on a consistent basis more often. And that playground that you have winds up solving some really obscure use cases. One that we've talked a lot about, both because the cause is an important cause, but because the problem is so illustrative of this chaos landscape, is the Global Emancipation Network. That is an organization in San Francisco that's trying to take a data-driven approach to highlight how much human trafficking exists, how it's happening, who the perpetrators are, who the victims are, and then be that abstraction layer that helps inform authorities around the globe so that we can do a better job of understanding the problem and trying to put a stop to it. And for many of us, certainly me before I got closer to the organization, I viewed this issue as more of a runaway problem, a small society, a small portion of society. And as you get closer to it, it's a big problem. It's affecting hundreds of thousands of people per year. There's kidnapping, extortion. But the nature of the problem comes back to these silos, that there are thousands of organizations, airlines, police departments, federal agencies, and other not-for-profits that all have a piece of data that if you could find a way to take the non-structured, non-curated data and dump it into an investigative swamp, you can actually start to then ask questions that in a silo you wouldn't be able to ask. And we've seen that in these more obscure use cases. Global Emancipation Network is an interesting not-for-profit one. We've partnered with different environmental organizations, NOAA as one for very complex atmospheric issues. We're working with a team in California that's trying to predict and then respond to wildfires more quickly. But then on a very pedantic basis, we're helping Porsche with their new Taycan, which just looks stunningly beautiful, as their electric vehicle. We helped them in the R&D process to understand the multitude of signals that were coming in from a very different footprint and architecture for electric vehicle versus combustion engine that they're used to. But then Splunk is embedded as part of the Taycan experience itself, so you can get constant feedback on driving habits and all the variety of constantly changing data that they're finding with the car, but then combine that with the multitude of road and weather and other attributes and aspects that will hopefully help that be an excellent driving experience.
And one of the things that you've also done really well as a company is to make this data accessible and actionable. You've got really fantastic visualizations and dashboards, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would say we had very mediocre visualization as dashboards, but we've leaned in pretty hard on the usability piece. Yeah. Tim Tully became our head of engineering and CTO a couple years ago and has really brought, he and a lot of people that he has recruited, brought a very different design thinking and aesthetic. A lot of the folks have come from Yahoo, Google, LinkedIn, so consumerization, having lived consumerization, not on my boring enterprise side where I get to play with it in my personal time, but I've never built apps around it. And we've taken our design team from what was roughly 5 to 6 people to over 60, but who we recruited was the important part. We recruited Airbnb RISD grads. We recruited Twitter designers, people that were deeply steeped in consumerization and the design ethos. And any of you that look at anything that we talk about at our user conference in October.conf, you'll start to see these products ship, where everything from the colors that we're using, the attention to detail on simple things like bezeling. We created a whole different font, which is the Splunk font, because when you are typing SPL, which is our query language, but it turns out to be helpful all over the place, you're intermixing numbers and text, and it's really difficult to understand and see clearly pipe commands versus a standard I or an L. Numbers 1,000,001 winds up rendering very differently than 1,000,000. So how do you make the interactions with Splunk much more consumable and readable, all the way to, we've got and it's crazy for Splunk, we've got an augmented reality framework that we shipped and a virtual reality framework that we shipped. We just got a video in from one of the power companies in the Northwest who, through RFID tags, they are Splunking their equipment in their electric facility. And now they can walk in with an iPad or anything else that is able to render augmented reality effectively, and they just walk around and can actually see the health of every element. Wow. We've embedded video with that, so for the equipment, there's actually the repair videos that are sitting right next to the dials. So if you see something on a dial and you need to do something and you need to repair, then the person can actually drop in. It's the same platform for virtual reality. So if it's an environment that you just want to play with with your Halo on or Oculus framework, you can actually play with it as well. So for people that follow and track Splunk, we've gone from this investigative swamp index and complemented that with a next generation stream processing product and a federated query product that happened to be open source based. We built on top of Flink and Kafka for stream processing, on top of Spark for federated query, which 4 years ago, that was a religious divide that no one in engineering was willing to actually accept. It was like, it's all C++, it's all our code, open source is the devil. And really thought through a very different way of consuming data so we can reach those of us that don't code for a living anymore. And when you think about a manufacturing floor operator or a train operator or a plant operator, they've got a whole different world to live in, and we want to bring data to every problem so we can turn data into doing, and to do that we have to think differently about the way that you consume data.
I was going to ask about the future, but you just jumped right into it. So obviously one of the biggest challenges is just the consumption of this incredible volume and variety of data that's coming at us faster and faster. What's the challenge that you look at when you see, for example, 3-5 years out, of giving that amount of data to people in a way that they can actually, now make sense of it? And how much does AI and ML play into this?
Really, really important. And I think AI and ML for all of us, as many of us in the audience, are excited about where that world is going to take us. And there's obviously the 2% corner case too. So first of all, from a Splunk perspective, we've grown from 10 terabytes being something that would be a lot of data you ingest today, to our bigger customers now ingesting 10 petabytes of data per day. And that's just in the 6 years I've been part of Splunk. And those handful of entities are now at a petabyte plus, are saying, if you don't get us to an exabyte soon, we're going to be in trouble. So this flood of data is real. And it's a constant challenge for the team to think through, how do we deal with that scale of data?
And it's not just the volume of it, it's also the variety of it, right?
The variety and the volume.
Yeah.
And just for context, I've thrown this one out a few times, but there's an internet archive that was started back in the early 90s, so we could snapshot what the internet looks like every single day. And the totality and size of the internet archive last time I looked was 17 petabytes from 1992 through probably 6 months ago when I looked. So to ingest 10 petabytes of data per day is a staggering amount of data, and then the variety is high as well. The biggest issue that we've had at Splunk, other than tech, is our pricing mechanism doesn't lend itself to people feeling comfortable with 10 petabytes a day. So I'm on a soapbox right now, letting everybody know we've changed our pricing. We've introduced unlimited pricing on a very prescriptive path for any organization that wants to run it on-prem, or you now just can go with a straight infrastructure-based pricing mechanism. So the volume doesn't matter. It's really, how do you process the data? How do you find the data? How do you extract value from the data? Which comes back to a core or a CPU or an infrastructure-based metric. So for any of you that are Splunk users, lean in with your rep, say, show me the new pricing. I want to go big with Splunk. Outside that, I think it goes back to a lot of what Marilyn, what we were talking about, is both the interfaces for people to play with data and then the need for ML to be part of every aspect of that data journey. For instance, our stream processing product, which we're releasing production in a month there in 2 weeks at .conf, does a really nice job of data visualization, so I can look inside that Kafka stream, see what's flowing across in a graphical format, begin to play with the data so I can enrich it, or I can cast it in a form I want, a table or a metric, and I can start to put alerts on it. That's all great from a human perspective, but with that volume of data, if you don't have the machine helping you, you can start there, but why can't the machine tell me, based on the queries I'm executing, what data I should naturally be looking at? And based on the automation routines from the actual queries to fulfillment of something in the security arena, I can see some type of nefarious behavior, shut off this IP address, or sandbox this file, or quarantine this user. From that routine, why can't I get feedback automatically to tell me, if you want to improve that routine, you actually should go grab 2 more data elements. You might want to cast these additional sets of metrics or beacons so that you are more effective in that orientation. And that's the way that we describe Splunk now. Is there's 4 key pillars for the underlying data platform: investigate, monitor, analyze, and act. And those pillars need to work cooperatively with ML frameworks, because each pillar can be enhanced. How do I run better investigations? But the capability between the pillars can be dramatically enhanced. I just ran a successful investigation. I found this is my root cause. To do that, this is how I got there. Automatically set up a monitoring routine, and after this much time of authentication of effective monitoring, create a predictive routine to actually get in front of the event. And without ML, there just won't be enough. It's a great goal to turn every human into a data scientist, but that still won't be the answer. It's like AT&T trying to turn everyone into an operator, which they did because we have dial tone, and well, not anymore, but that worked as an analogy in 1980. But.
Well, we have a whole session on this for anybody who's interested to go deeper on it, and hopefully you'll join, on AI and ML and where it's taking us with leaders from Tamer and Neurala and MIT and so forth later this afternoon. So we'll dig in more on that. But I want to switch to a different frame of discussion for a second. Obviously, we have a room full of hundreds of founders and company builders, and we'd love to take you back to those days when you've done it a couple of times, a founder and starting out. What did you learn back then, and now, obviously, that you've established a different scale of business? Wish you'd known back then that you'd love to share with this audience to help them in their journey?
So first of all, unbelievable admiration and respect for what all of you founders and early employees are doing. It is so hard. People underappreciate how difficult it is to both have the courage to even start something, but then to stick with it through the infinite number of pivots and daily challenges that you face to eventually get to even a shipping product, much less something that winds up being successful. Really, really, really admirable and beautiful work. What I've learned then and continue to see in my daily life at Splunk, and it's so trite, and there's so many books about it now, but the goal is not perfection, and the goal is not form. The goal is actually to serve users and end customers, and being right is the enemy of success.
Good enough.
I love the way Jeff Bezos frames his innovation criteria. He views Amazon as only having 3 big ideas that are still propelling the company forward: faster time to shipment or to receive the good, higher variety of good, and lower cost. Yep. And those are the entire guardrails that he says he's given to the entire Amazon team to experiment, that then winds up with flying warehouses in the sky and flying drones and everything you can imagine. And I think as a founder, and I did actually do this work for Splunk, going back and trying to be as clear as you can on what are the 2 or 3 high-level frameworks that are at the ethos of what you're trying to do, and then being completely open to the execution path to get there. Because I have found I am wrong 98% of the time on the execution path. And other people wind up taking in directions I never thought of, but I'm almost always right on the high-level framework that I'm trying to create. If lower costs for customers, which is something that we care about a lot, I know we have to change our pricing metric, and I know generally what it looks like. How do we get there? Hey, everyone else, let's experiment and let's open up as much creativity, but we're not going to get rid of the high-level mark that we're trying to drive to.
And it's funny because you said it very well. If you can just be really crisp about what that outcome is that you need, you've obviously got talented people behind you, they'll do amazing things, especially if it's very clear why the customer's going to win.
Yes.
So yeah, very well said. Marilyn, I don't know whether you wanted to sort of build on this theme and sort of pick up on some of the challenges from the earliest stages. You've been there, you know what it's like.
And you've said it well about the early days of startups, and not even the early days, the mid days of startups. What a roller coaster it is in terms of one day you get an order or close a customer, and then the next day you're just frightened about cash flow. So it's a challenge all along the way. But I also wanted to do a little bit of a 180 on you. We've talked about, sort of founding the company, but you're a public company now. And you've got a lot of attention from, the major institutional investors and many, many investors along the way. And the institutional investors, I'm interested in the company culture from sort of an investor and a board of directors perspective as well, because people now are paying attention to that. They understand that company culture drives company value, drives innovation. And so I wondered sort of, what is your thinking about that? How do you involve the board? How does a board of directors of a public company even understand how your culture is, health it is?
It is such an important topic right now. Employee involvement, culture, employee activism, the overall ESG topic is becoming more front and center. The Business Roundtable just released an update on shareholder primacy no longer being the only element. How do you serve customers? How do you serve employees? How do you serve community as being equally important? So I think we're evolving really rapidly in a good way to be a little bit more holistic and inclusive in our thinking. I feel very fortunate that I have a board that is highly functional, and I've been on many boards that are not, and they allow me to be almost too transparent. I'm a very, very transparent person, but I want the board to come along and be rapidly informed and be part of the decision-making process, so that, because I hate being surprised, I don't want them to be surprised, and there's a real vulnerability there, and we're constantly debating, did you have to bring that to my attention? Is that something I really need to know? And so it's hard to figure out the line around that. But I think if you have that trusted relationship between the board and the executive team, that further helps the executive team to have a more trusted relationship with the rest of the organization. And showing vulnerability, I think, is really important. We do not know the answers to a whole host of issues that we're dealing with, but we have faith we'll find it, and if we can rally the troops and we all put our heads to it, we'll actually get there. And the goal is not to know the answers, but to find a way to create an inclusive enough culture where everybody has a voice and they're part of helping us get to how do you guide the company with an effective moral compass and an effective business compass, so that we can do things the way that we want to based on our morality and still run a productive and profitable and an effective business. And I think what I've seen the past year, a lot more employee activism, which is good because it holds everybody accountable. But we're going to find our center on this. If we really are inclusive, then any decision that we make is going to have some people be dissatisfied with that decision. I'm going to sell to this company. Well, there are other people that believe in that company. How could you not? Yeah, that's great. Or some people that don't. How could you ever sell to that company? And it's hard if we maintain integrity. It's hard to talk about diversity and inclusion and not be diverse and inclusive in your approach to the world.
Yeah.
And I worry that we're so polar right now, and I worry that we're losing that middle ground. All opinions have some validity, and we have diverse and inclusive frameworks, so you can really see something from every possible angle, and then you still have got to make a decision.
Yep.
And so whatever we can all do to create high communications, the willingness to go and have a meeting with someone you do not agree with, and actually sit and listen. Like, why do you have that opinion?
Yeah.
What
And
led you there? Yeah,
Yeah.
And not in your head say, I can't wait to tell you why your opinion's stupid or wrong.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Because there's almost always something that's valid. Otherwise,
Yeah,
but, yeah.
Well, listen, we would love to continue to chat more, so we'll take this to the hallways, and I'd like to just ask the audience to say a moment of, or show